بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So, as I was putting this together, of course my mind goes to this talk. My mind goes to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and maybe I should talk about Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, who supported the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam with her wealth, or maybe Abu Bakr, or maybe both. But I decided to take a different route today. I want to draw our attention to something that's actually a lot closer to us, both in time and geographic location. Something that is very important for us to know because it does represent a lot of where we are today as American Muslims. It also will enrich us, inshallah, in terms of who we are as American Muslims. And this isn't something that's taught in your books, the books of American history, but it definitely should be one of the things taught there. I take you back to the 1920s. This is the decade called the Roaring Twenties, where women began looking for improved freedoms in this country. But there was another group of people who were roaring a lot louder than any demographic in this nation. But again, that roar is attempted to be kind of pushed aside, and that is the roar of the African American Muslim community here in America, among which I believe Masjid Tawbah, right? So Masjid Tawbah here in San Diego was established by the fruits of the people I'm about to talk about. A man by the name of Tarik Muhammad introduces Islam to another man who would take on the name Elijah Muhammad. And it came at a time where a large portion of the black community here in America had enough of the nonsense that they were facing. And they wanted something else. Some of the black American community tried to work within the system. Which led to people like Dr. Martin Luther King. And no doubt that's important and valid. But there was another strand. And that is the strand to challenge, to stand up to. That's what we're talking about today. So this is a people who had enough of a religion that was being presented to them as the white man's religion, as they would call it. So you know what, we want our own religion, something that more represents us. And they found it in Islam, in this Quran. And this launches, maybe you heard of this, a group called the Nation of Islam. Now, the Nation of Islam is a heterodoxy. They're not Muslims in terms of what the Quran and Sunnah ask of us. And so you might be wondering, why am I talking about their story? Because despite what I just said, their story is incredibly important in terms of how we should view ourselves in this nation and the potential that we have to really make a difference. So Elijah Muhammad is a one-man show at this point. And he takes on this task of gathering the black community and challenging the systems at hand. Imagine the gravity of this responsibility, this task. This isn't the year 2020, 2024. This is the year 1920. Slavery was still legal in much of this country. The blacks didn't have institutions, didn't have massive numbers, they didn't even have an economy. They have nothing. But nonetheless, Elijah Muhammad takes on this role and he begins to galvanize the black community. And one thing they start doing is changing their names. You know, you'd find that they have names, their last names are Jones and Smith and. Because during the time of slavery, a slave would take on the last name of his master. And so Elijah Muhammad is like, forget about this stuff. change your last names, change your names. And they started adopting Arabic names. Aisha, Latifa, Rashida. We still hear this today. Oh, that's coming from somewhere. And your last names, if you have a white man's last name, I don't need to make this racial. But this is the history. If you had a white man's last name, you change it to X. And he starts this, and people are like, you know what? This is pretty cool. And then they said, you know what? We need to have our own economy. And they launched this thing called Buy Black, meaning buy from your fellow black brother or sister. And they would put posters, and then dress. They took on a specific dress. What are they doing here? What's Elijah Muhammad doing? What he is doing is something we Muslims today, American Muslims today, haven't quite grasped yet. And that is, he is creating a culture that is defined by his community and represents his community. And so you'd find these groups of black people walking around in a very distinct way. They were very proper, very disciplined, very precise. And the way they began to speak became unique, just like we hear today. This is their culture. And from this spawns a lot of hip-hop artists. People like, what's his name? Ice Cube, right? You'll find him saying the word Allah in his songs, among other very popular rappers. Queen Latifah is part of this as well. Athletes, well, we all know the champ, Muhammad Ali, right? He's coming from this, and also comes from this major political activist, our dear brother, Malcolm X, hence the X. This is a community that challenged what's happening in their world, not by complaining, not by simply pointing to the hypocrisies and the double standards, but rather understanding if they want something for themselves, they do it when they're driving, when they're in the driver's seat. And that's what we Muslims are meant to do. When Islam came, it didn't come and just, hey, do a few rituals and, keep to yourself and behind closed doors. A lot of our parents or immigrants, when they came here, they just kind of went back. I'm going to stay in our homes, stay in our masajid. Don't be friends with non-Muslims. Remember this. They're not coming to our house. You don't go to their house. Of course, we need to protect ourselves. But essentially, what was the result of that? They were okay with being in the back seat. And when they were in the back seat, someone has to drive. And someone did drive. And the one who drove didn't exactly represent our values. And this isn't just the American Muslim experience, this is the global Muslim experience. Let's just stay in the back. So from this group, the Nation of Islam, came a movement that truly was a roaring movement, to the extent that the black community became proud of who they were despite the trauma that they're coming out of. That it was so powerful that it influenced all of American culture, didn't it? And we see that today. So powerful that it actually brought about the results that they were looking for, at least partially. That came in the 60s with the Civil Rights Act, didn't it? This is what this movement represents. This is the beginning, the first spark of Islam in this nation in terms of our current modern times. And again, Nation of Islam, they're not Orthodox Muslims. They believe in things that clearly put them outside of Islam. But where does this begin to take a change? The son of Elijah Muhammad while he had a mission, and that mission was powerful and he was extremely successful, he galvanized the people, he made them committed to something that seemed impossible. He also had his tyrannical ways. If you wanted to be part of this movement, you had to dedicate 90%, I believe, 90% of your income needed to go to the people, to the group. And he dictated where that money went. And if somebody did something that goes beyond what Elijah Muhammad wanted, there was a disciplinary measure, and it was severe. So there was a little bit of tyranny there. And of course, you couldn't read the Quran. It was an honor to have the Quran. Like, he dictated who got a mushaf, who got a copy of the Quran. But you will only take it if you promise never to read it. That's tyranny. But Elijah Muhammad, look how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, preparing all of this. Elijah Muhammad had a son. And his son went to Egypt and studied Islam in Al-Azhar. His father sent him. And when his son was in Egypt, he was sitting there listening to what Islam is, comparing it to what his father and this group are doing. Whoa, this is two completely different worlds. So while his son is in Egypt, he embraces Islam. He becomes an Orthodox Muslim. And he goes back home. But he couldn't do anything because his father has a tight grip. He would try and tell his father, "Father, this isn't really Islam. This is Islam." And his father just kept ignoring him. But Elijah Muhammad died, and his son takes over. Now, I think myself, if I was in this man's shoes, I would take it very slow, because these people don't mess around. They don't mess around. They will kill if necessary. But this son of Elijah Muhammad, he went full force, completely changed this group, started to call them to Orthodox Islam, started to remove the tyrannical elements of this group. And from here, the son, whose name you may know, Warithuddin Muhammad, passed away in 2008, I believe. I remember reading the newspaper when he passed away. I had no idea who this man was. He begins a very powerful movement. And from there, the likes of Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, adopting Orthodox Islam, Siraj Wahhaj, y'all know him? Siraj Wahhaj, the speaker. Oh, you don't know him? Look him up. He's of this. I have sat with the grandchildren of the people I was just talking to you about, and they are Orthodox Muslims, doing wonderful work in prisons and. What does this story have to do with charity? And the answer is, how do you define the function of charity? The title of the talk that I was asked to make today is Charity, or the Role of Charity in Social Justice. We tend to see charity as a function of feeding somebody who's hungry, alleviating the plight of somebody who's going through difficulty. But what's that going to do in the long run? It might temporarily alleviate the difficulty of a person. But I think we're now sick and tired of temporary solutions. We're sick and tired of having to react. We're sick and tired of being in the back seat. We have to be in the front seat. And to do that, we have to evolve our understanding of what charity really is. And the story of the Nation of Islam and some of our dear role models that we look up to today, they show us that real change is the result, or only comes about, when you challenge the culture, when you change the culture. You know, the Prophet ﷺ was sent to a people who didn't have who weren't in a shortage of social problems. In fact, the social and political mess of the community the Prophet was sent to ﷺ is very similar to the message we see here today. Very similar. But the Prophet ﷺ addressed that. He went after it. He worked with it. And essentially, what he did, what Tawheed did, what the Da'wah did for this community is to restructure the social order, the community, to where identity has nothing to do with one's background in terms of tribe, ethnicity, who their parents were. Value wasn't seen in money or in social standing, political standing, but rather in an idea, a vision, that we are one people. We are an ummah, and we worship the same God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And our allegiance is to one man, the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. This isn't just a theological call. This is a reordering of the social structure. And in order to do that, you have to have money. You have to. Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, I mentioned her earlier. Khadija was extremely wealthy. And she died having spent almost all of her money in support of the Prophet. And you look at Abu Bakr, same thing. You look at Uthman, same thing. You look at Abdurrahman bin Auf, same thing. So when I think of, and I encourage you all, when you think of charity, think of it in the following way. Social justice is a recognition that there's something off, there's something wrong, and that needs to be changed. And so when we talk about social justice, what we are really saying is change in society. And that is absolutely core to the life of the Prophet ﷺ. It is who he was. It was what he was sent for, to create proper, healthy, meaningful change. And in order to do that, money plays a huge role. So with money, when we talk about charity, our goal is to make a social change, an impact that is everlasting. And so notice, look at how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes charity in the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah, in which he says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَمَثَلُ الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ ابتغاء مرضات الله وتثبيتا من أنفسهم كمثل جنة بربوة أصابها وابل فآتت أكلها ضعفين فإن لم يصبها وابل فطل. Look at this description. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the example of someone who gives charity is like the example of a garden. A garden that's very high up. Very high up means everybody can see it. The amount of sunlight it gets is maximized because there's no higher mountain to shade it part of the day. It maximizes how much rainfall it accumulates because it's highest up. But it's not in a ditch where water gathers and thus floods, destroying the crops. It is in a prime location. And charity is the water, the rain that comes and irrigates this land. And as a result of that irrigation, the land becomes lush, full of life, teeming with nutrition for the human. And it produces double-fold because of its primary location. This is the image Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us for charity. And yes, part of the meaning here is to entice you towards paradise, because that's what paradise is in our minds. And yeah, charity is a path to paradise. But in a different way, it's telling us the results, the conclusion, the fruits of giving is to create this garden, this lush situation where there is no deficiency when it comes to sustenance, where people have more than what they need, where people have access to what they need. It looks beautiful, it's pleasant to the eyes. This is what charity means. To use it for change. To use it to bring about something better, a better result. Now, you look at these young ones, feeding the poor, the orphans, as was mentioned. Proceeds will go to orphans. And it might seem that what I'm saying is contradictory to the goal here, but I would say no. It's actually in line exactly with what I am saying. Remember, back when the conflict of October 7th began, and they wanted to allow some aid to enter. And we heard people saying, well, what's the point of the aid? We're just going to pump us up to kill us. Remember that? Yeah. We're just going to get full so that when we explode from the bombs, we just let more blood out. And that might seem very discouraging. Like, hey, man, they have a point. What's the point of sending them the money? And what I'll say is the following. When you send them money, you're not just sending them a piece of paper, you're sending them a message. You're sending them a message that there are people here who are supporting you. There are people who think about you. There are people in the world who care more about your well-being than about their own worldly pleasures. We are sending them a message to fight on, to continue to live, to continue to go forward. And we're sending a message to the enemy as well, that we are willing to sacrifice for our cause. This is what charity means. And so, on top of charity being a tool for social change, it's also a culture in the Muslim mind. The culture of giving. You know, when I was young, and my father would take me to the local masjid, and Ramadan would come about, and they do the fundraising. And they would sit there for 45 minutes collecting funds in Ramadan, and I kind of saying, I want to go home, this is too long and whatnot. I was only a little kid. But when I saw all these people wanting to give, I couldn't wait to grow up so that I can give. It's a culture. Our country, is it a culture of giving? There are a lot of people, a lot of Americans who give. We don't want to ignore that. We don't want to deny that. But when it comes to the system of capitalism, whether you agree, disagree, I don't care. But when it comes to the culture that capitalism creates, it's not a culture of giving, it's a culture of taking. Everything is about taking. In fact, if you were to contemplate what are the accomplishments of America, what is truly valuable about American civilization, all the answers you will get are materialistic. We made this, we did that, we invented this, it's all material. That's not the Muslim culture. That's not a healthy human culture. Rather, the culture of giving is the culture that we seek to create. We want to change society, right? Well, we need to change the culture in a way where giving is more valuable than taking. Because our Prophet ﷺ taught us that the upper hand, the hand that gives, the person that gives, is better than the hand that's under, the one that takes. You create that culture. And the story of Thamud, I had the opportunity, a few months ago, I was contemplating that story. So I looked in different parts of the Quran where the story is being mentioned, so I can compare and contrast. And something that really caught my eye is that Allah is constantly talking about the camel. Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty interesting thing. A camel, a huge camel, to come out of a rock, 8 months pregnant, that's pretty splendid. But I don't feel that the only point of this camel, the only reason why Allah is talking about this camel and mentioning it, is to tell us, oh, look at how big this is. There has to be something else. So I contemplated, why is Allah constantly bringing our attention to the camel? And I think it's for the following reason. The condition that the Prophet Salih made with his people, the camel will come out under one condition, or two conditions there were. One, you don't harm it, and the second condition is the point. One day, you get to drink from the well. The other day, the next day, that only the camel drinks from the well. meaning you alternate days. One day for the camel, one day for you. Why is Allah making this a condition? And I think the answer is as follows. The people of Thamud are similar to the people of America. They had a lot of money, a lot of riches, a lot of convenience and comfort. And this scenario, this situation creates a culture of consumption. I want, give me. And that culture creates social problems, as we see today. So Saleh is trying to train them by saying, share with this camel. Learn to share with the camel, to cure some of the social problems that they had. But they didn't listen, they couldn't be patient. So when we talk about charity as a form of social justice, as a form of social change, let us appreciate this very important fact. Charity is a culture. It is a culture that teaches me, teaches us, the other person is at least equally important to me. And that my resources aren't all mine. I must share it. I must share it with others. Hence Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَفِي أَمْوَالِهِمْ حَقٌّ لِلسَّائِلِ وَالْمَحْرُومِ. A believer is somebody who recognizes, understands that my wealth isn't all mine. There is a portion of my wealth that I earned, that I worked for, that's in my bank account, that is actually the right of somebody else. And so a believer is constantly conscious of other people. This is a culture right here. And I was in Chicago a few weeks ago, and I would go from my parents' place in the upper middle class suburbs, and I would drive to the city for a particular reason, for classes. And I would see, wallahi, this is an experience. If you're ever in Chicago and you have the time to do this, you will go from seeing homes that are very big into suburbs that are literally, wallahi, they look like third world countries. People from the black community. That's by design, it's not random. Yet, how many people actually care about this? How many? We don't have that culture of giving, the culture of charity. Charity as a form of social change. And the final lesson I want us to take from the story of the nation of Islam, or actually from Islam in general. The Prophet ﷺ says the following: الساعي على الأرملة والمسكين كالمجاهد في سبيل الله. The one who actively takes care of a widow, a female whose husband has passed away, or somebody who is poor, is like a mujahid, like a warrior. Look at how the Prophet ﷺ is tying three concepts. The concept of charity, with the concept of jihad, with the concept of being aware that there are people who need help. It's difficult taking care of somebody in need. It's difficult attaining to the affairs and the needs of somebody who's not your family. It's difficult. But in that, there's a lot of reward. And to be able to sustain that, you have to be somebody who really strives, really fights, really works hard. So as we evolve our understanding of charity, charity is a type of jihad. It's a struggle. And I don't mean a spiritual one, although that's true. What I'm talking about here is we, as American Muslims, need to become increasingly clever in how we mobilize our money. How often do we hear, the Zionists control everything? How often do we hear, AIPAC has tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars? How often we hear it so much, we hear it too much, to where it really demoralizes us. We feel like we're fighting Goliath. But guess what? Who knows Who knows how much charity American Muslims give per year? Does anyone know? Anyone? Take a guess. How much charity does the American Muslim community give per year? Not the global Muslim community, the American Muslim community. Anyone know? Don't Google it. Give me a guess.
120 million.
120 million.
I was going to say
10 million? Okay.
40.
40 million? All right. Anyone else? Ladies? 4 billion. The American Muslim community gives $4 billion a year in charity. Look it up. Our brothers and sisters at the Muslim Philanthropy Institute in the University of Indiana came up with this. And they said confidently, the American Muslim community is the most generous community in America. Because they compare it with non-Muslims. And this isn't about us, we're better than them. It's not about putting them down. But it's about building that confidence in us. You know, $1.8 billion of that is zakat money. AIPAC uses under $175 million per election cycle. You can easily match that. Easily. But when you bring this up in Muslim circles, Muslim communities, they can't wrap their head around using charity for that reason. Because in our minds, charity is what? That's about feeding someone who's poor. No. The Prophet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so many times in the Quran says, وَجَاهِدُوا بِأَمْوَالِكُمْ وَأَنفُسِكُم. Fight, strive, of course, everything within the bounds of the law. Strive for your cause. Push forward with what is important to you, using your money and yourselves. And this is mentioned multiple times in the Quran, always putting money before the self, except in one verse. Why? Because that's how we change the culture. The Black American community started off in a way. They built a culture. You all, which I'm very honored to be in front of you, you all encamped. You did that. It didn't last long. You may not think, you think it didn't bring the changes that you wanted. But you know what you did? You created a culture. You created a culture. A culture that is comfortable with standing up to oppressors. You created a culture that now has at least one party trying to balance the two sides. At least you did that. And that's no small order. And you should be proud of yourselves. You created that culture. But a culture without institutions will not last. The Black community, they use institutions. They use the hip-hop institution, music institution, to disseminate their culture, their cause, their feelings, their experiences. Increasingly in Hollywood, in sports, they use institutions so that their culture lives on. You all created a culture. Now it's time for us to understand that our wealth needs to be used to create or to fund institutions that will promote, maintain, and push that culture forward. So when we put our money, we are fighting with that money. And it's perfectly legal. We are fighting with that money. When we put money in whatever institution that challenges political Zionism, now we're no longer in the back seat, we're in the front seat. We're going to challenge it. Every penny we put means they have to put more. But we have Allah. And Allah gives. And He gives us more and He replenishes. That's His promise to us. But what is his promise to those who use their wealth for oppression? فَسَيُنْفِقُونَهَا ثُمَّ تَكُونُ عَلَيْهِمْ حَسْرَةً. They will spend their money and they will regret spending it. They won't have anything in return. When we create the institutions that promote our values, then we are fighting back. We're pushing back against other institutions that promote harmful values. And when we create institutions that promote our values, then we prevent other institutions from coming up that will represent oppressive values. This is charity being used as a form of social justice. We have every ounce of resources we need from manpower and female power, from economic power, intellectual power. We have it all. Wallahi, we have more than what we need. But what is the true difference between political Zionists here in America and the American Muslim community? There's one main difference that I see. They are far more committed to their cause than American Muslims are to theirs. This is what I see the difference. And I'm not talking about you all. I'm talking about the American Muslim community as a whole. So when you become professionals and you have your own income and you now are thinking, what do I do with this money? Remember, charity is about social change. Yes, it's about alleviating the plight of somebody who's going through difficulty, but it's not just that. It's to send them a message that you are worth being taken care of. It is about creating a culture that I am part of bigger than something other than myself. That the human cause, the Islamic cause, is more valuable than the paper that I hold that I call money. It is about using that wealth to create institutions, to train individuals, to invest in communities who will take the Islamic values and then share it with other people who could truly use something better. So charity is not just feeding somebody who is poor. Charity truly is the key element for social change. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all. You should be very, very proud of yourselves for what you did. Continue to do that. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. And once again, I'm very honored to stand in front of such a wonderful group of people. Jazakallah.